So you have until tomorrow, Friday, to register to vote if you want to cast your ballot in the upcoming general elections. And that's, of course, after President Cyril Ramaphosa declared May 29th the election date. Those who still want to register can visit the IEC's offices or use the electoral body's online portal. But let's get your sense of what else you need to know. We're joined this afternoon by Masego Sheburi, who is the IEC's Deputy Chief Electoral Officer. Masego, it's great to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. So just to clarify, the President has announced the election date, but he's not yet announced the proclamation of the elections. Those are different, am I right?
Indeed, those two are different. The announcement was made on Tuesday, following a statutory mandated consultation between the President, Premiers and the Commission. That has to be followed up by a number of proclamations, 10 to be specific. The President must proclaim the elections for the National Assembly, so must each of the 9 Premiers. We anticipate that those proclamations will be gazetted tomorrow, and once they are gazetted, they then have the force of law. The announcement is just a public statement alerting the public that a date of an election has been made known, whereas a proclamation has a number of legal consequences, among those being that at midnight tomorrow, if the proclamations are issued, the voters' roll for this election will close. So everyone who's not on the roll by then will not be on the voters' roll for the election. Secondly, it calls an election into place, meaning parties and contestants can now start to submit their candidate nomination documents. And thirdly, it forces the Electoral Commission to publish an election timetable, and as the name suggests, a timetable is a list of activities that must happen and the time and dates by which those things must happen.
Okay. So that proclamation puts into effect a whole range of things that will then come out of it. So that's midnight tomorrow. That's the important thing that our viewers need to know. Midnight tomorrow is when the voters' roll essentially will close and you will no longer be able to register to vote. You're saying, Masego, if indeed the President does announce that proclamation, might that still be in question? I mean, is there still room for last-minute registrations here?
The only opportunity for last-minute registrations is between now and tomorrow at 11:59 at night. So we anticipate that all those 10 proclamations will be issued sometime during the course of the day. So people must make sure that before midnight, those who are not registered are registered. Those who need to update their details also do so using our online portal or visiting our local offices during working hours.
All right. So that's the proclamation process. And then, of course, one of the other big issues for these elections, given the focus especially on young people who will no doubt be voting for the first time, voter education is going to be incredibly important. Masego, there are 3 ballots. People need to know exactly what they will see when they go into the voting booth, what will need to happen. That's a huge challenge now, surely, for the IEC.
Indeed, it is. And for that reason, we are using scientific findings, research findings to inform how we undertake our civic or balloting or voter education. A significant number of persons still prefer radio and television as a source of getting information. For that reason, we will have, within our limited resources, presence on those 2 mediums. We have presence also on social media. We're doing animations that we share with all interested persons so that they can circulate them among their cycles. Thirdly, and in order to transcend the cleavages of literacy and those type of challenges, we also have face-to-face interactions in communities, in languages that the people can speak, to localize some of our voter education content so that people understand that for this election it is key that a person is registered correctly, because they can only vote at their voting station where they are registered unless they give pre-notification to the Chief Electoral Officer of their intention to vote elsewhere. Secondly, to explain the 3 ballots, what their implications are, and how a voter will experience the voting process on voting day. But if you remove the metros, which is 8 of them, the majority of citizens are already accustomed to voting on 3 ballots, because in local government elections, everyone except the 8 metros, people vote on three ballots. So a 3 ballot will not be necessarily a new phenomenon to the majority of voters.
A record number of parties and independent candidates contesting these elections, Masego. How does that complicate things for the IEC?
Look, we have in excess of 600 parties that are registered and exist as political parties, but we know that not all of them will contest these elections. There's about 363 parties that are registered at the national level. All those parties must first meet the requirements to contest, and the requirements in broad strokes are the following. A party must submit a list of candidates before the cutoff time. It must pay a deposit, which is refunded if it gets a seat, and that party must confirm that everyone on their list of candidates is allowed to stand in terms of the constitution. For parties that are unrepresented, i.e. a party that is registered but doesn't have a seat in national or a provincial legislature, over and above those requirements that I've indicated, that party must submit at least 15% signatures of voters who support their candidature. Similarly, independents must submit their name and acceptance of nomination, as well as a deposit that will be refunded if they are elected into the Legislative Assembly for which they are standing. And
for the ballot itself, how many parties and independents do you reckon will actually be on the ballot?
We have designed, in anticipation of the as yet indeterminate number of independents. We know from parties that with each elections, the number of parties that contest increases. In 2019, we had 48 parties on the national ballot out of a combination of 78 unique parties that had met the requirements. We have designed our ballots to accommodate a number of permutations. We will have small ballots where we do not have a lot of contestants. We will have ballots up to 48 contestants, and we will also have a ballot layout for up to 96 contestants. Our preference, having interacted with voters, is that we must set parties one after the other in a single column ballot. However, it is foreseeable that in certain elections we are going to be forced to have ballot papers that are set in double column or even maybe in multiple pages. And in those instances, we anticipate that there may be difficulties in those voting stations among voters. To ameliorate the difficulties, once we've printed the ballot papers, we'll also have orientation ballot papers on big posters at voting stations so that persons may familiarize themselves with the layout of the ballot and also have an understanding of where they are likely to find their party on that ballot so that they are not confronted with the ballot for the first time at the voting booth.
And Masego, on election day, would it be possible, given all of the privacy around my election being my vote being my secret, that if I am an elderly person and I do need assistance with the ballot on election day, would that be available to me?
Indeed, that will be available to you, and that brings us to another important considerations. We live in communities, in households. If you know people who are infirm, disabled, sick, or elderly, and for that reason are unable to get to a voting station, by all means, let's assist those persons to apply for a special vote so that they don't have to go in conditions of indignity to a voting stations. That category of voters, once approved for special votes, we will visit them at their place of confinement and extend the right to vote there. For those persons at the voting stations who, owing to illiteracy or other challenges, they will be assisted. They can bring a person that they trust to assist them, or they will be assisted by the presiding officer in the presence of political parties. To further ensure that people don't have to disclose their choice to our staff or party agents on voting day, we will be using a universal ballot template. That is a cardboard hardcover that you insert a ballot in. And if a person can read Braille, they will be able to make a mark without disclosing their choice to any of the persons at the voting station.
Masego, there's also ongoing litigation in the build-up to these elections. One of that is the Rivonia Circle. It's still seeking clarity from the Constitutional Court about the number of signatures needed for political parties. And I suppose this relates to independent candidates as well. This kind of litigation, does it impact your readiness in any way?
Indeed, it is better to prepare for elections when there's certainty and there are no lingering court challenges. But as it relates to independent candidates, the court had spoken already in December last year to say for independents, they only need to submit 1,000 signatures. We have reconfigured our system to accept 1,000 signatures. As it relates to political parties, the court said the matter was not properly before it, and therefore it left this 15% requirement for unrepresented political parties in place. That is what the system looks like, and if proclamation happens tomorrow, that is the system that will make available to parties, and that will be the requirement as it stands in the law that unrepresented political parties must submit 15% signatures linked to a quota in a previous election.
Yeah.
We have entered a notice to abide the decision of the court, and the sooner there is a decision, the better for all involved.
I imagine, just from everything that we've discussed so far this afternoon, and I mean, we've talked about this for months now, that this is not only the most important election since democracy for our country, but probably logistically one of the hardest ones. Is the IEC feeling that pressure? And to that end, are you getting more people on board to just deal with the scale of what's ahead in just 3 months' time?
With each election has its own unique set of circumstances. This one, we think, will be characterized by two things. One, a higher voter turnout. Two, longer ballots that we've hitherto not had. And all those things will coalesce, if not properly mitigated, to cause difficulty at the voting station. We are alive to the challenge. We are looking at ways to manage the queues at the voting station better, the ways to make sure that people, when they get in the queue, they've already interacted with the ballot and it will be easier for them to find their party of choice or candidate of choice. And thirdly, we are looking at additional capacity to help with the count, because it will be difficult to count longer or ballot papers that are set in multiple columns or on multiple pages. So we are putting all those mitigating factors in place, and those will be in place come the 29th of May when the elections will be held.
And I suppose voters also need to know, Masego, that there will likely be a delay in the elections being declared, longer than the usual 3 days, just because of the longer ballots and because of the issues that we've discussed.
In law, we have 7 days within which to release the result. We have hitherto done it in 3 days. We are planning on meeting that standard, because if it takes longer for the results to be released, you're creating fertile ground for all sorts of theories to start to germinate. So we are planning on releasing the elections on the third day after voting, after having concluded all objections. However, if it becomes necessary to go beyond the third day, the South African citizens will be the first to know, and the reasons why it will not be possible in this instance to declare the result within the 3 days that we have hitherto been accustomed to.
Masego Sheburi, let me thank you for your time this afternoon, sir. The Deputy Chief Electoral Officer at the IEC. Incredibly important interview with a lot of important dates there, but the important one that we need to remember is that by midnight tomorrow, you will no longer be able to register to vote. This is an especially important message for the young people, the 14 million young people who didn't even bother registering in the last general election.